Hi and welcome to RCKicks. On today's show we're going to be building the chassis for the TC-01. That's the brand new chassis that's just come out by Tamiya, and they've released it with the body for the Championship Edition Formula E. Now if you haven't seen the unboxing video for this, I'll stick a link up here. Well, go on then. I'll wait. Take your time. Hurry up. And you're back. Excellent. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to unbox this, lay it all out. Obviously you don't need to see that because that's boring as hell. Right, see you in a minute. So there you go, all done. Didn't take very long to lay out the bits and pieces, and we start with the chassis straight away, and we're going to kick off on page 4, number 2, where we're putting in 3mm BA13s, D4s, BA12s, BA1s. So let's crack on and get it started. I was very impressed with Tamiya for designing the chassis like this. Even in its bare form, it's very rigid. Turning up the sides like they did adds so much more rigidity down the whole length of the chassis. That's the front and the rear arms all done. There's a lot of washers and things like that, but it's pretty straightforward really. So that finishes page 5, number 7, and now we move on to page 6, and we're going to be putting the electronics in, starting with the servo. So I need to get the servo mount and get one of my servos out and put the servo saver on it, and that is page 7, number 9. Starting to look like a car, sort of. Right, let's keep going. I'm sorry, I'm just a sucker for a bit of blue anodized aluminium. Right, we're having lots of fun. We managed to shoehorn the electronics into this car. Now the electronics I am attempting to fit into my TC-01 is the Easy Run Max 10 and the brushless 3652 Easy Run 400 kV. This should make this chassis get up and go quite nicely. I bought it as a combo. It was just easier. But there is issues. This chassis is super tight. You think working on a 1/12 Phantom pan car is tight? This thing is crazy tight. But I am happy to report that you can run this electronic speed controller in this chassis if you remove the fan. Now the problem you've got is you only have this much width at the front of the chassis, so you need to get it in this side. Now there is a bridge that sits across the middle, and then you've got your receiver on the right. Now receiver, not too much of a problem. Motor, also not much of a problem. 540, or you can even go longer if you go for a small receiver. Now they do a very tiny receiver from Radiolink that would go in there, and then you could run a longer motor. So that is great. You can really put lots of power into this. I've basically shoehorned in the maximum you can fit in this car, and that is the Easy Run Max 10 60 amp. That without the fan is the maximum size you can fit. You cannot fit 1 mil bigger. It fits completely perfectly. I had to turn it around this way to have the brushless wires connected. I haven't got to the point to know whether this is going to be a problem or not, and it just about fits underneath the bridge for the front prop shaft. So it's super tight, and the main problem comes from this piece. Now what happens is that you have the diff, and that's the top of the diff plate. So while I was fitting it in the first place, I thought that this would be back here. No, it actually sits all the way back there. So I don't know if you can see that. I'll put some pictures close up. It actually sits over the top. So you have to remove the fan. So the easy run is just about fits. So there is no space on all fronts, the front to back, the width and the height. So really you're looking at that is probably the best kind of electronic speed controller you're going to get in this car. So I'm really lucky that I managed to get it to fit just. Right, we carry on. We've now fitted the motor, so we're now at page 9, number 17. Whew, this thing is tricky. Right, let's carry on. So I've built up the diffs, tiny little things, not that difficult. They actually are oil diffs. You actually fill them up with oil, so don't grease up your gears before you build them. You just use some of the damper oil, and that's what it asks you to do, and then there's a seal that you have to put in. One thing that I made a mistake on is you have to be very careful with the shims that you have inside. Now there's two types of shims. You have a BC8 and a BC7. They look identical size wise, material. The only thing that's different is one is 0.1 millimeter and the other is 0.3 millimeters. Now by eye, and if you pick them up, you won't know. So you've got two choices. One, you have to measure them, or two, which is the way I did it, is if you flex them a little bit, the 0.1s are softer because they're thinner, and the 0.3s are harder. So I would recommend you sort them out first, because you actually put in the diff, you put a 0.3 and a 0.1 at the top and the bottom. So the mistake I made is I put two 0.1s in the bottom, which means I was only out by 0.1 of a mil. So when I built the diff, it felt totally fine. The problem came when I built the second diff. I was then left with two 0.3s, giving me a 0.6, and it should be a 4. So that's 2 mil, 0.2 mil difference. And when I built the diff, it was very tight. So then, of course, I had to go back and find my mistake, which means I basically had to dismantle both diffs again. And because I filled them up with oil, I lost quite a bit of oil. Now I'm hoping I've got enough in here to do the dampers, but I have spare oil, so it's not that much of a problem. But if you don't, could leave you with a bit of a problem if you don't have enough oil. So check that, because it's very, very difficult to tell unless you flex them or measure them. Right, so now I've got to put the diffs in the car, and we're starting to get there. Finally, those electronics were tricky. So there isn't much space to play with, and then we've got to get the hubs done and the suspension. So let's keep going. We're now on the home straight. It's starting to look like a car. We've got wheels. I always put the wheels on a bit earlier if I can get away with it, because it kind of feels like you've got a car again. And yeah, everything's fine. The diffs seem to be working all right. No problems at all on that front. It's actually very different, so it's nice to work on a different chassis. I'd like to have thicker rear tyres, but I guess that's the tyres. They run thinner tyres on the Formula E, but I'd like to have slightly fatter tyres on the back. It would look better, but when the body lines up, I think you can't tell that it's got thin tyres on the back. Next, we've just finished page 1636. Now we've got to go on to 37, which is the 4 dampers. Two at the front, two at the back. Obviously nothing special there, but obviously they're inboard, they're not upright, which is pretty cool. I've never had a car that has the dampers laying down inboard, so it'd be quite nice to do. But dampers are dampers and they're not exactly exciting, so what I'm going to do is I'm not going to bother doing a montage for that. I'm just going to skip over now and the dampers will be done, because if you've seen one or two of my videos, you've seen me make hundreds of dampers and they're about as exciting as watching paint dry. Right, see you in a minute.
You can call me stupid. Yes, you can call me sheep. You can say I'm lazy. You can say I'm weak.
And the suspension's in, super easy. I would definitely do the end joints first and then clip them in. Don't do it the other way around. It's a bit more of a faff. But it's looking pretty good. Very different, really like it. Feels premium. The plastic feels more premium and it's super rigid. Right, next we're on page 18. We're fitting the battery trays. Pretty straightforward. And then the end is in sight. Then what have we got after that? We got the spoiler, the rear spoiler to do, front spoiler to do, and then it's the body. Yeah, right. Let's crack on and get the battery tray done. Well, that was a fantastic fun build. I was really happy with it. It was very different for me, so it was a nice experience. The only issues I had, and I think a few people are going to have, is purely the location for the receiver, and the electronic speed controller is tucked under the front suspension. Gaining access to this area is a real pain in the backside. If you have to swap out your electronic speed controller, you've got to basically take the whole front end off and take off the cover that's covering the diff. That's how deep you've got to go in. So when you take the cover off, you've obviously got to take the top arms off and everything, so that is a bit of a pain. Also, the steering rod for the steering servo runs right over where you'll probably have your brushless wires. So I think the best way to do it is, instead of having the electronic speed controller in the position that Tamiya tells you, is put it on the other side and then put the receiver on that side, and that'll give you more space. Definitely want to get yourself the smallest electronic speed controller you can, as well as the smallest receiver you can. But obviously if you're running brushless, you need the power, then there's always going to be an issue where you're going to struggle with the size of your electronic speed controller. But apart from that, the chassis is beautiful, all the rest of it, and you can go much bigger with the motor if you keep a small receiver as well. Right, everything works. One thing I did find as well, if you want the perfect battery for this, then I would recommend the Overland 55C Sports Track 4500 milliamp hour 3S. This fits perfectly into this chassis, and that gives you 3S, which is crazy bonkers for this sort of thing. So what I'm running in this system right now is a Max 10 3652 5400 kV motor, and then a 3S. So that is more than enough for a car like this. I have just glued the tyres on because this power will blow those tyres off at half throttle. So right, what we've got left to do? Well, we're going to take it for a small test ride out the front. So let's see what it's capable of. I've trimmed up everything as much as I can on the bench and set my endpoints. So let's see what it's capable of. Whew, pretty hot bit of kit this. Yeah, there's a lot of power in this car, and brushless is where it's at. I was barely on the trigger, and I was worried I was going to spin out and smash it up against the curb, and I was doing 38 to 40 mile an hour, no problems. I'd like to take this somewhere open, and we're going to run it and see just how fast it goes flat out, because I want to do the same for the Phantom as well. It did feel very much like the Phantom, very planted, very nimble, but obviously having some suspension, it's really good. So big fan. Definitely need to change the tyres, that's for sure, too thin on the back. Oh, one other thing, I'd just like to say a big shout out to Gary Archer's wife. I salute you for allowing him to buy one of these after watching my video. So a big thank you to you for getting one of these for him. Anyway, what's next? Well, we've got to paint the body up. That's next, so better get started. Check out one of these videos for some more RC fun.